This your man, the STL Stranger, Umar Lee. We are here at Mancha Coffee House in lovely Old North St. Louis. Just had a wonderful pancake breakfast, late breakfast. People know me, know that I'm not an early bird. I'm a late riser. And I got my daughter with me visiting from Texas. And I have with me none other than the esteemed Gail Delaney. How you doing, Gail?
I'm fine, thank you.
All right. And so Mark Lord, my executive producer, the Baba Booey of St. Louis, he has said that you have to talk to Gail Delaney because she has a lot to talk about.
Okay.
You work at the Griot Museum and you did the new museum down in Montgomery, Alabama. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about you. So you are a St. Louis native?
Yes, I am born and raised in Meacham Park,
okay,
which of course is newly annexed part of Kirkwood with a history all its own. I went to school to be an educator back in the 60s, late 60s or 70s, and taught public school special education for 42 years. Began volunteering at the Griot for a couple of years, and then now I am an employee, a member of the staff there at the Griot Museum. I've always had a love of history. My family roots stem from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and so the story that we went to recognize in Alabama is all a part of family history that we've carried with us generation after generation.
So you grew up in Meacham Park?
Yes, I did.
When before it was part of Kirkwood, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And what high school would you went to out there?
Well, you had to go to Kirkwood High School because you were in the Kirkwood district. Yes.
Did Meacham kids always go to Kirkwood, or was there a time?
No. Kirkwood remained segregated even a couple of years past the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision, because my mother's youngest sibling, Clara Brown, was the first out of the family to attend Kirkwood High. Prior to that, once you finished your education at James Milton Turner School, which went to the 9th grade, you had to find your way by public transportation or whatever to Webster Groves to attend Douglas High School, which is where my mother and, like I said, and the older siblings went to high school. So
you had, I guess, you had Douglas and North Webster, you had Kenline High School, you had Smith and Robertson. Would those been the only three African American high schools in the county at that time? Do you know?
At the time, but because, like I said, that's the generation, my previous generation, I would have had no knowledge of any other high school for the area we live in other than Douglas. And so you pretty much communicated with, blacks in Kirkwood, Meacham Park, with the blacks in Webster Groves, and kind of, there was always close ties, between those two black communities for our part of St. Louis County.
My nephew, who was murdered on Thanksgiving on the west side, had been living in Meacham Park.
Okay.
And his vigil was at Meacham Park. And a pastor gave the funeral, a Meacham Park pastor. So he was talking about, he alluded to growing up in Meacham Park at the funeral. And, it's a place with a lot of history. And I'd like to do, actually, shameless plug, if you go to the St. Louis Speaks, stlspeaks.com website, I have a short story, #Nelson. The name of the story is #Nelson. And we deal with two families from Kirkwood, an African-American family from Meacham Park, and a white family from Kirkwood. And the story begins in Kirkwood, Meacham Park, and it goes to New York City and comes back to the city of St. Louis.
Wow.
So anyone interested in Meacham or just in St. Louis history may find that interesting. So where did you teach the special ed at, Gary?
Well, I started teaching in Kansas City, Missouri, moved from there to St. Paul, Minneapolis area, and taught in St. Paul, Minnesota, in elementary school.
Too cold for me.
Pardon?
It's too cold for me.
You get used to it. It was a wonderful place. So I did end up relocating from there to California, where I did not teach, and then came back home to St. Louis. Worked in the private sector in children's homes and programs for juvenile delinquents, or status offenders, and ended up with St. Louis Public Schools, Vashon High School, and Cleveland Naval Academy. Then ended up taking a job in St. Louis County with St. Louis County Special School District, where I worked with the behaviorally disordered and emotionally disturbed for the remainder of my years in education.
And how important is that to the community? Because I was working with at a residential facility, intense level, and just obviously I can't discuss the details, but I read the case files of all the kids coming in, and just I don't think people can truly even imagine the horror some kids are coming from. I mean, I think as bad as you think it is, it's worse.
A lot worse.
And I asked the supervisor. I said, "You've been at this for years." I said, "What happens to these kids when they age out?" I said, I said, "Does any of them become a success story?" He said, "All my years, I can't name one kid that's a success story." He said, "I can name a bunch of them that got killed real quick, and a bunch of them went to jail real quick. A bunch of them ended up in the news for committing horrific crimes."
Yes.
And there's a real need out here in the community.
There is, because at the age of 18, when the system drops them, they become young adults, they're unemployed, they're uninsured, they don't continue to get the kind of help and therapy that they need. They've been traumatized, and they have endured things that most adults would not be able to deal with. And so what we send them out there in the world with is nothing that prepares them for survival. And stories are very sad. Most of the endings are not happy endings. And, try as you might, if you get one out of a school year, that you find out later did make it to be able to at least care for themselves and have a decent life, that in itself, you have to just rely on and hold on to those small good stories in order to continue to do the work, or to continue to have the optimism, about our society and the way, our young people are struggling.
And this is what I was trying to tell someone earlier. We had a discussion. I know this is off topic, but it relates to what we just said. They were critical of Nation of Islam. And I said, well, obviously I hear some things, that I don't agree with myself. But, and things I wish they weren't said. But the thing about it is, when I talk to the old heads, and when I lived in New York, or I lived in Brooklyn, and here in St. Louis, they telling me who could take the young men, clean them up. I'm trying to say that I'm talking about at the lowest of the low, forgot about my society, out of the family, and it was the nation, if you look at the mosque in New York where Malcolm was the minister. That was a mosque almost in its entirety made up of people that had been in prison. Almost in its entirety. And some of the most prominent people there were people from these situations like I mentioned. No families. They come up from the South. They didn't have any families in New York City. So when you have that kind of powerful narrative, people not gonna care if, you might have said this, you might have said, trying to say, they're looking at the results.
Yes.
Trying to say. And there's so few people. I mean, people in St. Louis talk about a brother Anthony Shaheed. Oh man, I don't like Shaheed or this or that. Well, you can say what you want to, but show me someone else that will walk into public housing in St. Louis, that will walk into the dope houses in St. Louis, that'll walk into the street corners of St. Louis 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning to reach young, mostly young men.
Yeah.
When you show me that, then your critique can become valid. But if all you're going to do is sit and criticize on social media, and you're not out there trying to reach these youth, it doesn't really hold, because this is a serious situation.
Very serious, and I support one of the famous expressions by Malcolm X, and that is by any means necessary.
Right.
And we've got to try to save our youth by any means necessary, whatever works. Take the religious out of it, stop focusing on what you disagree with regards to the nation and any other group. Just whatever support is there. If it's the Black Panthers, if they're helping our youth, there's nothing harmful that's going to come of it, because they need all the support. They say it takes a village, but everybody doesn't want to be a part of the village. They only want to live on the outskirts, or they only want to visit. So, yeah.
Yeah, the village might have to, take care of business sometimes. That's what it is. So you have a lifelong fascination with history. You love history.
I do.
I'm a student of history too.
Okay.
And this is a historian right here, Mark.
Yes.
I'm a bootleg historian. I'm like a shade tree historian.
Okay.
But I love history.
I do.
And it's to me, it's the most fascinating of all subjects. That it's almost a sea that there's no bottom to it, there's no end to.
No.
You can just delve into that history. And so that lifelong love of history took you to the Griot. Why is the Griot so special to you?
Well, number one, it's a very unique museum, and of course, because of the fact that the emphasis is on people that are that were born and raised in our region, the Missouri-Illinois region, it's very personal. And I think as a resident of the city of St. Louis, whether it's St. Louis City or county, there's a need for you to know, the people and places, that hold the stories that we need to know, that we need to tell and share, so that this history is kept alive. And I appreciate the work that's done by this director, Ms. Conley, to keep the stories alive. It's very hard work and sometimes not, I don't think, as appreciated as it should be. So, when you come there and if you like history and you see the work that's been done there and the mission of this organization, you can't help but want to, I think, be a part of helping to preserve and forward our stories and keep the history alive. Because without it, we have a roadmap to follow.
Are these stories that cannot be told adequately by a non-African American institution? Is it important to have an African American institution of museum learning of history? Or
it would be wonderful if our fellow museums, if our school districts, if the textbooks that they provide the students with, were fully inclusive, but they're not. So, someone has to step up and do the work and carry on the mission of making sure that the knowledge is shared. So it's not that it should be a black or a white thing, it's just that it has to be important enough for you to want to put the work into it, So, a little bit about Dred and Harriet Scott is great, but there are so many other stories. And to be fully inclusive, you've got to, do the research and tell the stories of every and all of those people, that have made their mark in our region.
I attended Ferguson Florissant schools. That was my school district at McClure North High School. And I might be mistaken, obviously, I'm in my 40s now, so I don't remember everything, but I remember almost no local history being taught. Any history, black or white, anything going on.
Right.
And it was kind of odd because, Ferguson was different. When you had kids from Kenlock, Berkeley, Robertson, Florissant, those were the communities. And all of those places have unique history. And none of that history was being taught to the kids. Now, it might have been taught in the oral tradition in the families, but it wasn't being taught in the schools. And I just think it would be so valuable for the school children to go to the Griot, to learn this history, because I don't know if it might have changed. They might just get the Dred Scott piece, but do they get the full historical picture of the black experience in St. Louis?
I don't know of any school district that includes African American history as a major part of the curriculum in terms of it being a class, whether that's elective. I think it should be required because of the fact that we have not blended American history and African American history thoroughly. There's always that left out piece or pieces, and so the puzzle is incomplete. In my mom's day, you had to know by memory the Black National Anthem. You go to events now and they ask you to stand and sing it, and half the people I look around the room, they don't even know the words to that song. I'm like, we've lost it because it's not being taught. I'm a witness to that. It's not being taught by anybody. Maybe some small private or charter schools are making a better effort, but public schools are not.
So we had a little short break here, refreshment break here at the Mancha Coffee House, where you can get coffee and hot chocolate and pancakes. And for those that partake, you got alcoholic substances here, and sandwiches and everything else. So we're talking about the Griot, and leads me to the other new museum, and I don't know the name of the museum that opened in Montgomery. What's the name?
So we have the Legacy Museum, Enslavement to Mass Incarceration, and then also on that day was the opening of the Lynching Memorial. The Legacy Museum, of course, is an indoor facility. The memorial is outdoors, and just a little ways right outside of the downtown area. And that is the memorial paying respect to the over 4,300 known lynching victims.
That's in Montgomery.
Those both are located in Montgomery, yes. But the victims that are recognized are from all of your major lynching, so to speak, states. Mm-hmm. Yes.
How far is that from the 16th Street Baptist Church? Is it close to there, or is it?
You can walk.
You can walk.
You can. I mean, it's a walking downtown area anyway. So yeah.
You know, it's just such a. The Alabama. It's I think in St. Louis, one of the things that we have here is that we grapple with this issue of the North and South. Are we a northern state or are we a southern state? I would argue a southern state.
I would agree.
And we think of slavery and lynchings as somewhere else. This happened down south. This happened in a bad place. When the reality is, St. Louis was a Jim Crow city. Missouri was a slave state. There were slaves right here in the city of St. Louis. Of course, we had many incidents in history. Elijah Lovejoy was killed by Missourians. He had fled to Alton, hometown of James Earl Ray, killed Martin Luther King. So there's a lot of this history, this dark history of lynchings, et cetera, that we like to look at as happening somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But truth and matter, they happen in the state of Missouri as well. Is that correct?
Yes. That's so true. We have our own history, and a lot of this, and a lot of what you learn traveling to the new museum in Montgomery, Alabama, is that these stories are buried, and many families, thank God, took the time to do the research like a member of my family did, my first cousin, to keep this history going by, doing the research, doing the legwork, doing the interviewing and the searching, to find, the roots of stories that have been told from generations. My grandfather always told the story of his grandfather being lynched, but it took my cousin's legwork to find real records of that.
Where was
newspaper
that
in Wilkinson County, Mississippi, 1879. Charles Brown.
And you were able to find that?
She found out everything about him and verified it with, like I said, news stories, reports, because many times lynchings were advertised in the news because they were events that people wanted to go to and take their family and kids to. So
what was the history of that? Why was he lynched? And how?
Okay, so Charles was a gifted carpenter, and he had built a home for a prominent family, and last name Fares, P-H-A-R-E-S, I believe. And because he was black and, of course, didn't hold any kind of status, they decided they didn't want to pay him. I mean, he's a black dude. He did work, so what? Well, he was very angry and he decided to come back to the home to confront the owner about, where's my money? Well, the man of the house was supposedly out in the fields with one of his workers, and the wife was the person he ended up talking to about, I want my pay, I did the work, blah, blah, blah. Well, when she sees her husband coming, heading back to the house, supposedly, as the story goes, she's going on and on about, she's frightened and this man has threatened her and he was going to rape her and on and on and on. And the whole point was, though, even from the men of the house, Mr. Ferris, was that, how dare you, a colored man, confront me or anybody about your money. We don't have to pay you. And so he was drug away and put into the barn on the property. And so the issue was, okay, we're going to get some more folks in here, and we're going to hang you. So he was put in this barn or this cellar, and later, when other friends or associates of the homeowner, gathered his backup together, they forced him into the woods and strung him up. And so his wife never saw him again. He left the house telling her he was going to get his money. So.
And thousands of stories like that.
Yes, there are.
Amazing.
So.
Now, at this museum, are there names to the?
Well, what you have are these pillars, you might want to call them, at the memorial that hang just like a human body would hang from rafters, and on each one of these, for every county, and they are organized by states, and then the counties in alphabetical order. And so on each one of these, you will find the names of anybody lynched in that particular county. And and this place is our nation's first memorial to those victims of lynching. And I have some photos. You're allowed to take photos at the memorial, but not, of course, inside the museum in the downtown area. So
no photos of the Griot.
No, we don't allow photographs at the Griot Museum either. So,
tell me about the mass incarceration piece. There's a separate museum to mass incarceration?
The museum, the Legacy Museum, is the focus of that museum is on enslavement, because part of the area that when you walk into the foyer of the building lets you know you're standing on ground that at one point was a warehouse where they threw in livestock and African Americans that were awaiting sale for the next day. So, we were livestock, so many people
so the slaves
perceived us that way. They were on the floor in there with animals.
With
yeah.
animals.
Yeah. That's how little they thought of us. So I am never going to forget some of the things that you see there. Now this, for example, is etched, and this is old steel that these hanging structures are made of. And then so you see Charles Brown, and they give a date. And so in alphabetical order, everyone that's a known victim of lynching in that county is recognized on that bar.
Gail is showing me a photo of engraved is the name Charles Brown, 10/2/1879, and below him is Steve Flowers, 9/20/1886, Willie Contz, 7/7/1891, Fred Robertson, 8/20/1896, and Lewis at the bottom. Can't make out the last name.
Yeah.
So that would all be from that county, Williamson County, Mississippi.
Wilkinson County,
Wilkinson
yes.
County, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm. And so this is what you see from a distance, what those steel pillars look like. Or you might refer to them as markers, but so you're walking through hundreds of those.
Walking through hundreds of steel pillars. Now, was there a Missouri section in there? Did you see the Missouri?
I did not see that.
Missouri, yeah.
Doesn't mean it wasn't there.
Right,
It
right.
took, you're so focused on
It's
finding
pretty massive,
your
right?
loved one that.
It's like going to the Vietnam Memorial.
So
got
many
so many
names, yeah.
Over 50,000 names. It's really something. Well, I encourage everybody to go down there to Alabama. So we did a trip a few years back. We drove from.
That's the legacy.
Drove from Dallas to Atlanta. I called it the tour of the Confederacy.
Ooh.
And we went through Louisiana. Then we had dinner in Vicksburg, Mississippi. Mm-hmm. Which is, Battle of Vicksburg, Confederate battlefield, graveyard. And then we went to, we stopped at 16th Street Baptist Church. And we but it was closed.
Oh.
It was closed. But we listened in the car to the great ESPN Films documentary, The Greatest There Never Was, the story of Marcus Dupree,
Okay.
which was a great documentary about a football player from Philadelphia, Mississippi. So I would suggest everybody. So it kind of tied in the subject matter. So here's a photo outside of the Legacy Museum. There's a big crowd there. And this was opening weekend, right? Was this,
Yes.
So I saw it on my social media. That
Okay.
A lot of people were going.
Yeah.
Now, will organizing bus trips from St. Louis down there, do you think that'll be something that's going to happen in the future? Or?
I would say it would be well worth anyone's while as a organization, would be a church, social, Greek, whatever. No one would be disappointed with the information, they would glean from a visit. Some of us hop around the country, going to as many museums as we, can get to, because we just love it, and that's where our stories lie. But, you don't have to be a museum enthusiast to gain something from visiting this in Montgomery. It is so awesome. And the mass incarceration piece of the museum, I found a very close connection to. When you read some of the literature, you'll see that of Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and tie that into exactly what's going on today. Because as appalled as people will be about what has happened in the past, they're not looking at the fact that the mass incarceration of young blacks and the wrongful charges that are brought against and people that are in jail who have done nothing wrong, all of the innocent victims and the projects that work to try to free them. And then, and Michelle gives a lot of information, in her book about what's going on in the world today in our society. And, when you look at Mike Brown in Ferguson, or you look at any of the other sad victims of the current rage of brutality, by law enforcement. I mean, it's 21st century lynching. You can call it what you want, but anytime you shoot people down, beat people down, or as with Trayvon Martin, accost him when he wasn't doing anything to you or anybody else, and take their life and get away with it, I don't know how you don't see that mirrors stories from the 1800s, late and early 19th century here in this country. And so where's the change?
Something to think about, words to ponder on. New Jim Crow, Michelle Alexander, obviously a similar work. And so many people from right here in St. Louis, in the Missouri system, in the federal system, in the Illinois system, and across the country. Mm-hmm. What's going on around the country. If we want to visit the Griot Museum, what days is it open, and what's the address?
The Griot at 2505 St. Louis Avenue is open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 5. If you have a group of 30 or more, you can call and make a group reservation and get a 10% discount. Other than that, you can come in all by yourself anytime between the hours of 10 and 5 on Wednesday through Saturday. Bring some young people, bring a group. It's something there for every age. There's some knowledge to be gained, and it's a wonderful experience.
Well, I've been to the Griot myself, and I highly recommend it. Gail Delaney, been a pleasure talking to you.
Same here. Thank you for having me.